Welcome in the fourth section of our course. In this section, we'll focus on writing high-performance Spring Boot starters. So, Spring ecosystem has a very good mechanism of extending it. We can provide a custom starter with all bin configurations that we learn about in the section number 2 that will enrich and speed up development of subsequent projects that are using this starter. In this section, we'll be creating a Spring Boot starter project that extends Spring ecosystem. Then we'll configure Spring beans managed by our starter. We'll define the API or library module depending on your naming convention. First video will be about defining components that will speed up Spring Boot application startup. So we'll see how can we spin up new beans that will speed up development lifecycle. Finally, we'll be providing high-performance component that could be used by client applications. This is a first video in which we'll be creating a Spring Boot starter project that extends Spring ecosystem. So firstly, we'll be creating Spring Boot starter skeleton. We will create a skeleton project and also will define modules that are needed to achieve our goal. We'll be adding needed dependencies for all modules and we'll define API and implementation module. So let's go to the code. So Gradle library is a very simple one, so we are just defining JUnit and we are specifying that parent is our Spring Boot custom starter. Then autoconfigure is a little bit more involved because it has more dependencies. Particular, it has Spring dependencies. So we can see that Spring Boot dependency is here present, also Spring Boot autoconfigure and configuration processor. Also, we need to have an API definition because autoconfigure will use API. But also, what is important to note is that in the API module, we don't have any Spring dependency, only in the autoconfigure. So Gradle library API is Spring agnostic, and here we have all Spring logic that is using API underneath. Finally, if you will open your sample app that is using the starter, you can see that there is a dependency to our starter. So things that we created will be defined here. So our starter and starter test, those two dependencies are needed because we will want to test our Spring initialization logic. So once you know those dependencies and modules, we'll be able to look into them more in the next section.